faith drawing together every single week. We're so glad that you're here. This is where we practice peace, service, and openness to all. My name is Pastor Greg. We have with us Pastor Jason. Pastor Josh is actually up in the sound booth today doing some work there. And we had our awesome ministry music intern, Alex Moore, helping us out. Pastor Pam is away on vacation this week, getting some much deserved R&R. And Pastor Eric from Lidditz Church of the Brethren is here, and he's going to deliver the sermon for us today. We're really excited about that because it's the first in our Sermons on Demand series. So you'll want to definitely stick around to see and hear that. A couple of announcements as we get going. One is that related to the sermon, we will be having our sermon talk back, which happens right after the postlude. So sermon, benediction, hymn, postlude, a little special music, and then Eric and I will be up here and we'll be talking. It's your chance to ask us questions about the sermon or about other things in general. So stick around if you'd like to for that. A special greeting that we wanted to get out today was to Brethren Volunteer Service Unit, the first ever virtual orientation that they've ever had they're in the middle of it, is happening this week. I got to spend a little bit of time with you all BVSers, and it was really an honor to see these people who are going out, spending a year or more of their lives in service to others. So, to Daniel, Kylie, Chad, Rose, Evan, Alexa, Alton, Naomi, Eric, Michael, and Amelia, so glad that you have joined us this morning as well. Everyone, welcome to worship.
All right, good morning, everyone. We had another exciting adult Sunday school class this morning. Tori Bateman was able to join us and talk to us a little bit about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and a Christian citizen. So that was a wonderful experience. As a reminder, you are all invited to join us for our adult Sunday school class. They are happening each week at 9:15. So anyone out there who's watching today, please feel free to join us for that Zoom session. You can find that information on our website under events. You can go back and watch any of our old recorded Sunday school classes. Upcoming next week is Kate Good from the Parish Resource Center, which is a local ministry support organization. And also upcoming, we have Sharon Flatten, who will be joining us all the way from Nigeria, who's a Bethany Seminary student over there. And then David Steele, who's the General Secretary of the Church of the Brethren, will be joining us as well later this month. So check out all those upcoming Sunday school classes that are happening. Additionally, our Thursday Bible study happens every week at 1 p.m. John David Bowman will be leading that. We had a wonderful conversation on Thursday, starting to dig into the Sermon on the Mount. So once again, anyone who's watching this morning, I would encourage you to join us for that. A couple other important announcements about some youth activities and some ways that you can help support our youth. Next Sunday in the afternoon, August 9th, junior high and senior high youth will be doing two separate physically distanced outdoor activities. You can check out the email that you have received. You'll be receiving some more information about that, but our junior high will be going on a hike. Our senior high will be doing some creek tubing. So please reach out to me with any questions that you may have, and check your email inbox for that. If you haven't been getting any emails, it's important to check in your junk folder. Our emails are not junk, but we've been hearing to some people that that's where they've shown up, so just make sure you're digging in and checking that out. A couple more brief announcements. First, I did want to say that during children's time this morning, we're going to have a special guest who will be an artist who will be joining us. We'll see how that goes. But I would encourage all of our children and parents, if you're interested, grab a blank piece of paper, maybe some markers or crayons, something you can write with, and we're going to be trying to draw a picture together. So just wanted to give you some time to check out that supplies. So consider doing that. There's so much happening, it's hard to try to think about everything, but we are super excited that you're here with us. And a reminder that the activities and slides that you see, the invitations to online events like Sunday school classes, Bible studies, Zoom, the events that you see, we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome. And we're so glad that you're watching with us today, and feel free to join us for any of those things. Take it away, Eric.
All right. First, I want to say, way to kick it off with Jurassic Park. on classical guitar. If you've known me for any just short amount of time, you know that's my all-time favorite movie. So thank you, brother. That was great. So we are excited to kick off the Sermons on Demand sermon series, and I guess I'm up first. And so for this week, our Sermon on Demand request comes from Rachel Raffensberger, who is an awesome member of the Lidditch Church of the Brethren. She had a great request exploring the themes behind Christianity and mental health. And so we were really intrigued by that request. And this is actually kind of right up my alley, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I was up to before becoming a pastor in the Church of the Brethren a little bit later. We are intellectual, physical, emotional creatures. And the scriptures are full of examples of emotions on full display from both the imagers that God placed in the world and then also from God's own self. And then especially modeled in the living and lifestyle of Jesus. And so our scripture reading that will come later is actually one of the shortest verses in the Bible. And it can seem a little discouraging at first, but I actually believe that it's God's emotions on full display. And it reveals to us that God is one who feels deeply with us and wants to help us through those emotions and how we can grow through those cues that we feel within ourselves. So we're really excited to kick off the sermon series, so we'll see you in a bit.
Yeah, we're really interested and excited in this topic because I don't know about you, but I feel like it's one of the most taboo topics that still exists in society. We're getting better at talking about mental health and mental illness, but we still kind of stuff it down. And we still kind of feel like things aren't always right if we're talking about it. And so I started to think about some ways that we might think about that differently. And so here we go. Some questions for you. What if we thought about mental health more like we think about physical health? What if we did checkups, not just when we feel bad, but as a matter of routine for both our mental and our physical health? What if we disrupted this narrative that somehow mental illness and struggles are due to a person's inner shortcomings, while physical illnesses and struggles are a noble battle with some invasive force? What if our healthcare systems valued mental health prevention and treatments with the same rigor and seriousness as physical health treatments? What if we understood that just like physical illnesses, not all mental illnesses are of the same intensity or gravity? That some mental health diagnoses are genetic, some are situational, brought about by stress and circumstance, some are caused by trauma, accidents, and none are a person's fault. What if we were able to be as upfront with our mental health concerns, maybe even here in church, as we are with our physical concerns? That's something I've talked about with my counselor. And what if we read the Bible and saw that many of our biblical heroes appear to have mental health diagnoses ranging from situational depression and anxiety to bipolar disorders, and that God used each and every one of them? God had created them to be who they were. What if we didn't gloss over the fact that Jesus healed people of physical and mental health issues, and that much of his teaching is for the sake of our mental well-being? Maybe some things to think about as we come to worship this morning. Please pray with me. God, we open all of ourselves to you this morning. The physical, emotional, and spiritual places that are hurt and tender to the touch. Maybe the places that have sometimes been shamed by others. We know that you love us and hold the entirety of who we are. And we are so grateful for your love. In Jesus' way and love we pray. Amen.
Hello, I'm Rob Boss, and welcome to the Joy of Markering. We're so glad you're here today. Hey, I hope that you've put a piece of paper in front of you and that you have a marker so that you can draw with us, because anyone can draw. You know what I like about markers? It's like a pen and a paintbrush made friends, and so we should bring a friend up too. I have a squirrel named Mr. Peapod. Where is Mr. Peapod? Here he comes. Here he comes. He's going to join us today as we draw. Say hello to everyone, Mr. Peapod. Yeah, we're glad you're here too. So hey, we're going to learn to draw a squirrel today. We're actually going to draw a portrait of Mr. Peapod to share with folks. But you know, I want to ask you all a question. Just as I start to draw, maybe Mr. Peapod can help us with this. But Mr. Peapod, what do you do when you're angry, I wonder? What do you do? Oh, that's your angry Mr. Peapod face, I see. Okay. Well, how about when you're, what do you do when you're sad? Ah, yes. Yeah, if that's your sad face, Mr. Peapod, I'm glad that you're sharing it with us today. What about when you're confused? Ah, yes, that's your confused face. You know, Mr. Peapod, one of the things you're teaching me is that sometimes it might be a little difficult to tell what someone's feeling in a particular moment. I hope you all are enjoying drawing a little bit of a squirrel here with Mr. Peapod. I hope you'll forgive me. I did this. I didn't quite mean to, but, there are no accidents. There's just happy little mistakes. And so you can always correct that and fix it however you want a little bit later. But let's keep drawing. Sometimes, and Mr. Peapod, maybe you agree, but sometimes it's a little tough to tell how people are feeling. And I often wonder, how can we get to know a little bit more about what some people are feeling on the inside? Mr. Peapod, do you think that it helps you when someone asks you how you're feeling on the inside? Like maybe if you're feeling a little sad, it's usually a good thing when someone says, Mr. Peapod, how are you feeling today? And you can tell them that you're feeling sad. Our emotions are something completely normal, and that God actually gives us all of these emotions to feel. It's part of the gift, and it's part of what it means to live in God's image. Because the Bible is full of just really amazing stories of biblical characters that felt and that would feel deeply, and that they would often share those feelings. But the person that did that the most was Jesus. You know who Jesus is, Mr. Peapod? Ah, yes, he's one of my favorites. Hang on a second. I know something that'll make Mr. Peapod happy. What if we gave him something to eat down here? Let's draw a little bit of what do squirrels like to eat? Yeah, they like to eat acorns. So let's give Mr. Peapod and you can use whatever color you want to draw a painting for Mr. Peapod. Isn't that nice? But no, Jesus would often express his emotion. He would cry. He felt alone sometimes, and all of that was perfectly normal. All of that was perfectly normal. He mirrored those feelings for us. And so, how do you share your feelings? Maybe if you feel a little afraid before bedtime, or you're a little anxious before going on a big trip in the car, right? I get that too. Maybe you're a little sad that you didn't get something you wanted when you went to the store. Or maybe you're feeling happy because you just got back from a big trip. Or maybe last summer you spent some time at the beach, or you were just in a pool this past weekend. That makes me feel very happy, doesn't it, Mr. Peapod? Yeah. So my friends, this is part of who we are, and we bring who we are and our feelings. We can paint them, we can draw them, because here's what we can do to make someone else feel happy. Maybe you can draw your squirrel, your Mr. Peapod, and then take a picture of it and send it right over to info@etowncob.org. Have your mom or dad or an adult help you do that. And then wouldn't it be nice if you could send this off to a friend or a loved one or a grandparent or an aunt and uncle? Maybe help them feel happy in that moment. Friends, it's good to feel the things that we feel, the things that we experience on the inside. There's never anything bad or wrong with that. And put that creativity, put those feelings into a world that you can create in your drawing. Share those feelings with others. You deserve to share those feelings with others. Thanks for tuning in, and next time we'll draw one of my pet deer on one of these drawings, and you'll join us again for that, won't you, Mr. Peapod? Okay. Take care, my friends, and God bless. Come on, Mr. Peapod. Come on.
Well, that's another way to mask these days. We're so glad for Rob Boss that he was here with us with Peapod. That's really wonderful, and quite frankly, a little challenging to follow that up with prayer time. But a beautiful reminder of how we can share our feelings together. In the chat is a place where you can share your feelings with us. We want to remind you that we want to hold this entire online community of faith together in prayer. And so if there are prayer concerns, joys, concerns that you have that you would like to share with the larger faith community, we invite you to put it in the chat. We also invite you, as always, to be in touch with us here at eTown Church of the Brethren. You can email us at info@etowncob.org, info@etowncob.org, and that's where you can reach us, and we would be glad to talk with you further, to respond to those, and to share those joys and concerns here in worship, if that's something that you would like done as well. So one that we have this morning is that we don't know, but any week now, you may not see a lot of Pastor Josh. And that's because he and his wife Elizabeth are expecting their second child at any moment. So when that happens, Pastor Josh is going to go on paternity leave and take care of his family in new ways. And that's really exciting. So we are really happy to share that joy with you all this morning. And we want to continue to pray for all of those who are pregnant, who have just delivered, who may have a child in the future. What a blessing. And we also continue to pray for all those who are parents in one way or another, whether biological or not, and for the fathering and mothering that we all have all benefited from and can give to the world around us. And so we'll hold that in prayer as well. I'm going to share a prayer with you this morning, and we're going to have our typical couple of moments of silence. It is a prayer that is specifically targeted and hones in on mental health and mental illness. I invite you to think about the experiences that you've had with mental health issues in your life, whether your own or those of a loved one or friend. Think about how we can hold one another together, just like we would hold one another in physical illnesses. How do we hold one another closely and in God's abiding love in all circumstances? Please pray with me. Loving Creator, we know that you take each one of us just as we are, and you walk with us always on our journeys. We're so grateful and in awe that you have created us in your image. God, we confess that we are still how it impacts ourselves and our families and other people and their families. Give us the courage to face our challenges. Help us to identify mental illness as the disease it is, that we might have the courage and wisdom in the face of ignorance and stigma to take it as it is. Inspire us as we seek to overcome fear, acquire knowledge, and advocate for compassionate and enlightened treatment and services. God, we know you see the ignorance and injustice that divides and separates. Bring us closer together. We acknowledge sometimes we feel discouraged and hopeless. God, help us to always see ourselves as you see us, people of value and worth, people of creativity and potential. Help us understand the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit in bringing about health and wholeness. Lead us as we open our hearts and homes, our communities and job opportunities, our places of faith. Enable us to find ways to be inclusive of people living with mental illness in our everyday lives. Be with doctors, therapists, researchers, social workers, and all of those in the helping professions as they serve with care and compassion. God of liberation and shalom, we seek the power of your Spirit, that we may live in fuller union with you, ourselves, and all of our sisters and brothers. Healer of our every ill, this is our prayer. Amen.
Every week we have a time where we come together and we consider the different ways that we can give to one another. You'll see on the screen in a little bit that there are some opportunities for you to give to your home congregation, wherever you may be watching from, or to support Elizabethtown Church of the Brethren in a number of different ways. We always talk about how financial gifts are valuable, but also gifts of time and energy and effort and commitment. And this is a very giving congregation. It's something that I am so thankful to be a part of every week. When needs arise, people always seem to step up and help out. And that happens in all sorts of different ways. There's all sorts of different organizations and groups that this congregation is able to support through its annual budget. And an example of something that you all might be able to help out and contribute with is just 2 weeks from now, on August 16th, the youth will be having a fundraiser for NYC. There'll be an opportunity to stop by the church and pick up some frozen meals and some items that you can take with you. And we are still trying to continue to raise money for NYC despite this all happening with remote watching and the social and physical distancing that we're all experiencing. Another way that we can think about our giving is how the organizations that we continue to support that are in our budget. One of those examples is something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is Camp Swatara. A great sadness that this summer I was not able to spend a week at camp, and that's the first time in decades that hasn't happened. And I know a lot of people are also lamenting the loss of camp this summer. But there are still some ways to support camp, and camp is definitely still doing some activities, even though the summer camp program isn't happening. So I'd invite you during this time of giving to watch this video that camp made for our congregation to share about some of the things that are happening at camp and ways that you can continue to be supportive.
I have marshmallows, I have chocolate. I just want to have a campfire, you know?
Wait, campfires? We can have these at Camp Swatara. They're like all over the place. Like right there, and there, and there, and there.
I wish I knew how to build a campfire. I want to have a campfire, but I have no fire circle, and I don't know how to build a campfire.
Oh, I heard that they're teaching fire building at the exploration days.
Oh, I'm really craving a milkshake right now.
Wow, at Camp Swatara, there's a East Lodge Cafe. They have great milkshakes. Like really great.
I have these discs for Frisbee disc golf, but I have nowhere to play.
Wow, at Camp Swatara, they have a new disc golf there. It's pretty amazing.
I'm really in the mood to go rock climbing, but I don't know where to.
Rock climbing, they do that like a few times a month here at Camp Swatara. It's great. Yeah.
Hey, E-Town, how you doing? Greetings from Camp Satara. My name's Tim, the executive director here, and oh, hold on a minute. I'm missing something. So just bear with me for a minute, sorry. No. Oh, I know what it is. I know what I'm missing. I'm missing you. We're missing you here out at Camp Satara. It's certainly been an interesting time for all of us. We've all been impacted, and we're looking for ways that we can see folks get together in what the Lord has made, come and fellowship, enjoy time out in creation. And here's a place to do that. We'd love to have you out. We're looking forward to seeing ways in which that we can serve people, even in the midst of guidelines, to try to help protect people and honor one another. And in the end, it's been a long time. It's like a ghost town sometimes around here. And staff have done a great job, but we're at the point where we really are missing our families that are out here. So we invite you to come out, check out what's going on. We understand that people are in different places with being comfortable or confident. We're putting things in place to try to keep things clean here. And at the same time, we're adding some new things like our East Lodge Cafe. If you're interested in staying at family camp, that's available for you. And in the end, just want to say hi. We miss you. Hope to see you soon. Blessings from Camp Satara.
Thank you, Ethan, for continually supporting Camp Satara. We hope you get a chance to come and enjoy beautiful creation before too long. And if you don't make it here to camp, perhaps Camp Satara will be coming to you with some Camp on Wheels programs. Hope to see you soon.
Miss Camp. Thank you, Camp Swatara, for keeping us connected this summer. We miss you as well. The Bible is full of emotions. In fact, it only takes a few chapters to really start digging into what the human experience is and the things that we feel, and even discovering how God can feel. But I want to lift up one particular scripture reading today, and this might be the shortest scripture reading you've heard in a long time before a sermon. It comes from John, the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Now, you can hear this scripture and think of it as a discouraging thing, but I actually see it as quite hopeful. Really, really hopeful. In that God knows what it's like to feel. That God knows what it's like to experience the things that we experience. So John chapter 11, verse 5 says this, two simple words. Jesus wept. Before becoming a member of the Church of the Brethren and a pastor, I spent several years working in a state hospital back in Virginia, which is my home state. I started out as a behavioral specialist there. Now, what my team would do is we served as a high-risk team that would go into a unit, and they would help folks that were in the hospital's care address behaviors that were problematic in the larger community. We would work through positive reinforcement to help that person see their behavior, reshape their behavior, and really own their new behaviors. I worked with some of the best psychologists and psychiatrists in the state. Incredible, incredible people. It was hard and it was painful work, but it was also extremely fulfilling and really rewarding when we would see individuals come in at what they would say was their worst. But then just a short time later, they would go back out at what they would say was their best. It was a beautiful thing seeing the recovery model at work, knowing that people were always deserving of a new start, of a fresh start, of a new chance at living their lives whole and full. Later, I started to teach classes at the hospital on emotional stability and emotional regulation. I would help individuals recognize their feelings as cues coming from within themselves that was really trying to say something about their experience. Cues as what their inner self was saying about their environment and those around them. It's good to notice these types of feelings and use them to grow, to understand yourself in a fuller way. I loved that class. It was always a very full class. We usually had to find places for people to sit because, quite honestly, this is something that each and every one of us deals with on a day-to-day basis. But how we deal with it can really, really vary. The most popular feelings that we would talk about in the group were, of course, sadness, and then the infamous anger. And these can often serve as what are called secondary emotions. They're typically a feeling that is a reaction from a prior feeling. See, we are physical, relational, intellectual, but very emotional creatures. The blueprint of the human psyche is all the proof that I need to know that God's blueprints are deep and complex and so, so beautiful. It was during my time as a hospital liaison where I learned, somewhat unfortunately, what others think about mental health outside of the walls of hospitals. Right before seminary, I landed what I was convinced was my dream job. I was so happy to get it. I was a community liaison. And essentially what I would do is we would get a call that someone in the Charlottesville area had been admitted to the hospital, likely at UVA, and then ultimately would end up at Western State. And it was my job to serve as their bridge into recovery and back into the community. So I represented for them their supports once they were out of the hospital, putting in place things like mental health workers' benefits, making sure that they had a stable program and a stable system of getting things like their medicines, and especially continuing to see doctors, therapists, and counselors. I was good at that job. And sometimes I think about it. I miss it. It was extremely hard and again, but very rewarding work. I learned a lot in that point in my life. And again, I think the most painful thing I walked away learning was that there are so many in our community that have a really unhealthy stigma about folks that are dealing with issues surrounding mental health, surrounding mental illness, and surrounding emotional health and well-being. We are not very good as a collective society in normalizing these kinds of conversations, in naming this as part of the human experience. How we can regulate our emotions or even just own and name our emotions in ways that get us to a healthy point in living our lives, rather than turning to things like self-medication. And I'll get to that in a moment. There's so much shame involved in issues surrounding mental health or mental illness. And I think that it's our job to correct some of those understandings of what's going on. The mentality is that people need to get it together, right? Folks with emotional instability need to be out of sight and out of mind. We don't like it particularly when folks interrupt our just normal, on-the-go, hectic way of living. Very rarely do we ourselves stop to address or help someone that's experiencing these kinds of moments. And so should we be normalizing mental health, emotional health? Yes. Yes. And for me, that was one of the earliest ways that I was able to connect with the Scriptures, because I saw layered and complex, and let's be honest, oftentimes off-putting characters in the Bible. Scriptures are full of fascinating, layered people that are putting human emotions on full display, almost on every single page. We find anger in the story of two brothers found in Genesis. Cain feels deep, deep envy for what his brother Abel has, and he reacts. Abraham fears for his life in front of Abimelech, and so lies about his wife Sarah. Hagar feels alone in the wilderness after being sent out of Abraham's camp, but there she discovers in the midst of her emotions a God that sees her. King Saul becomes depressed when he hears God's message that he has somehow been rejected as king. And so we have an account of his feeling of rejection and how hard that was for him. There are things like greed in the Scriptures. There's plenty of references to lust. Hello, King David. And then there's guilt. Deep, deep guilt that Judas feels after betraying Jesus. Such a deep emotion he encounters to the point of taking his own life. But on the other side, there are so many things like joy. There's affection. There's loyalty that we see clearly on display just in the book of Ruth. As God's imagers, it is no wonder that we experience emotions because, as we learn also from Scripture, God feels different. It feels deeply. God is an emotional being. God's heart is mentioned as feeling grieved. God also experiences pleasure. God experiences satisfaction in the good created order that He's put together for us. Psalm 2 verse 4 references God laughing. I like to think about God laughing. Jesus Himself wore His emotions on His sleeve. It wasn't very difficult, especially as the gospel authors portray Jesus. You kind of get a sense for how He's feeling in most of the moments as He goes about His ministry. Jesus Himself feels things like compassion. He feels anger. He weeps. He knows agony. He knows anguish. He knows love. He knows joy. He knows loneliness. Why will no one stay awake with me? I like in Mark how Jesus sighs. And over the gospel writers to record an account of Jesus just... I imagine Jesus even had a few moments where He rolled His eyes, which makes Jesus the most relatable guy for us. Jesus is once again a positive role model for how we model healthy emotions. He was set up as such a deep feeler, and I think that that's a significant lesson for all of us in the church to consider. Jesus reminds us that we cannot forget or set aside the psychological ramifications of our lives and our faith. There is a very real intersection between our faith and psychology and how God can and does speak through the things that we feel. One of the reasons I like Jesus so much is because Jesus is hard at work normalizing mental health through His healings, through His teaching, through His role modeling. Allison Cook was on an episode of one of my favorite podcasts called The Bible for Normal People. It's a great podcast. Please check out the podcast that I'm referencing now in the sermon. I'm going to have Jason post it in the chat. You can listen to it anywhere. It's also available on your phones. It's a really great episode that addresses a lot of what we're talking about today. She talks about how many are conditioned to ignore or suppress feelings that she has actually experienced that sort of behavior within the walls of her own church. Allison Cook is a psychologist. She's a PhD. And she leads in some interesting discussions on how psychology and therapy intersect with faith and a life in God. She was too used to hearing things like facts, then faith, then feelings, growing up in church. She mentions this interesting idea of something called spiritual bypassing, an unfortunate way of moving quickly through feelings that we encounter and avoiding the pain that may come with those feelings by placing a Band-Aid that looks and sounds a lot like a platitude. And she said that this is a real danger that the church can practice. This is something that's very unhelpful to people who are seeking a deeper understanding of who they are and how God is helping them feel. So it's like when folks try to make us feel better and they mean well, and as we say in Virginia, bless their hearts. You might hear something like, and her example was this: look, you don't need to feel sad. God has given you so much to be thankful for. Yes, but also unhelpful. to rush through something as serious as sadness, to rush through something as serious as grief. Another that you may hear is that you don't need to feel anger. Anger is a sin, and we have got to pray that sin away from you. This really minimizes the authentic emotional experience that deserves full attention. We do this to ourselves. We are good at masking the pain that our own emotions can cause us to encounter. Painful or negative emotions are viewed as sinful and bad. I heard that at an early age. And the problem is we become to rely or trust or fear our own emotions a bit too much. We might even forget in our suppressing those emotions how to properly process them. One of the examples I gave folks at the hospital was we had a drawer at our house where we would try to be good stewards, and when we would actually get a grocery bag from the store, we would save it so that we could reuse it later down the road. The problem is over time, you use fewer bags than you actually take in. We've gotten a lot better about that at the Landrum house. But what we did is we would open this drawer and we would take those bags and we would sit them in there and we'd close it back up. Well, over time it gets a lot harder to fit those bags into that drawer until one day you open the drawer and they fly out everywhere making a mess. And you don't know what to do with them. This is exactly what we do to our emotions and our feelings. And this is exactly the kind of behavior that can leave us to an unstable mental health. It's too easy to set it aside and forget. It's too easy to just turn to other things so that we can quickly feel better. We should be dealing with these things within ourselves when we feel them as cues. I think Jesus wants us to face these parts of ourselves. Allison's best point for me in the podcast, in the interview, that she points out that Jesus clearly calls us to love our enemies. What if Jesus was calling us to love even the enemies that reside within us? The enemies that live in our upstairs, in our mind, in our conscious and unconscious minds. The voices that we come to either mistrust or trust too much. What if He wants us to love those enemies that live inside of us? And just like we are called to love our neighbors and our enemies in a transformative way, what if we invested more time in loving these parts of ourselves to a point of transformation and deeper understanding? Imagine the difficult job we have when we learn to love those voices in our heads to the place of pure transformation and truth. Most of the folks I worked with at Western were being lied to by their own inner feelings. They were constantly telling themselves that you're not good enough, or you're broken because you feel and act this way, or that you'll never be able to contribute anything good to the larger society, that you may as well give up or just do whatever you want. It's tough work helping people through those enemies that live within themselves. Imagine naming the voice or feeling that convinces you that you are unloved, that you are unlikable, and that you are alone. That feeling of shame that has somehow tricked you into thinking you'll appear weak if you reveal any of this to another person. And we can be conditioned at an early age to feel that shame when we fail. When we fail to exude that our life isn't just great but perfect. We must always appear to have our lives in proper working order, especially when around others. And especially when we go to church on Sunday mornings. Put on the happy face, we're told. No wonder folks turn to things like self-medication. We feel sad and we think we shouldn't, so we decide to eat the entire box of Turkey Hill ice cream. And that's a high risk for us brethren, as I throw in a brethren cliche, thank you. because that will fix us. We'll feel better if we do that. Or we feel anxious, so we run off to Target and we buy something to mask the pain that we're feeling in the moment. We consume substances in an effort to numb ourselves so that we won't feel. We can even consume church as a way of masking or just covering the things we feel deeply within ourselves. That if I go to church, if I pray, if I listen to the sermons, if I do everything that's on the checklist, that maybe somehow I will feel better. When we hurt in this way, that is when we could potentially begin to hurt other people. A good friend reminded me this week, hurt people hurt people. Now, I want to speak to the fellas for just a moment because I think we've been brought up with some kind of understanding that to talk about our feelings or even our own mental health is a sign of weakness somehow. Boys don't cry, at least that's what we're told. Buck up and be a man, shake it off and get back in the game. Be like Tim the Toolman Taylor, or however he grunts. That's the model of what it means to be a man. And then too often, society misattributes that women are overly emotional. They have no control of their emotions. Also not true. In fact, it's the women in my life that have taught me how to name the emotions that I feel, to process them better on a deeper level. We need a space to process and understand those emotional and mental cues within ourselves. Our emotions are trying to tell us something, and we must learn to listen to them well. That view of hiding emotions isn't very biblical either. There are some really emotional people, as I mentioned earlier in the Bible, and many of them need a really, really good therapist. I think, too, that it's important we model, like Jesus did, an emotional vulnerability with one another, especially within the walls of the church, especially in our places of faith. So for my main point, as I attempt to wrap this up, because we were talking about how we could have an entire sermon series on this topic, the church needs to be good at talking about mental health and about emotion. My main point is this. I think that the church is the perfect place, really, to help humans name and decipher the feelings we wrestle with in our day-to-day living. I think we should be the number one safe place for people to bring not their perfect selves, but their growing selves. And to do that, we have to be a little more honest with each other. Maybe it doesn't mean we always have to put on a happy face when we gather. Maybe it means we have to develop a level of trust and respect that where we can feel open to share, but also willing and ready to just listen to someone. And resist the urge for the cheap platitude, but really sit with someone in where they are. The risk is that we lose this ministry and discipleship opportunity when we create a culture, even within the church, that everything is perfect in our lives, when it's not. Let's acknowledge that grief is a process, and it's often a really lengthy process. Let's be cool with taking our time with grief, because far too often we want to rush others through that. And then we begin to wonder what's wrong with them that they're still sad. It's grief. It's serious. Let's work to normalize mental health and talking about how we feel with one another. Normalize mental health. What a way to be known in the world as the church. That they've normalized the way people feel and they work together on those feelings because it's a normal part of being a human being. And let's avoid the temptation to be anything like Job's friends, trying to band-aid the experience or point out his faults or explain away why he's feeling the way he's feeling. Because sometimes when people are in a place of crisis, they just need someone to love them through listening. And so the church is the perfect place to grow through what we are going through. Now, all this being said, I want to be sure that we as a church avoid some of the pitfalls. This kind of self-discovery takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of introspection. This is not something where one Sunday is going to magically fix the way you feel. But it's our hope as pastors and as church leaders to help people discover the tools that lead to health, that lead to wholeness, that lead to resources that really can provide the level of transformation that we seek. Christians should have lots of grace with one another, a deep sense of trust that leads to a deep sense of belonging in the end. You know, a 20-minute sermon should not be your therapist every week. That's not really what we're trying to do. We do you and the community a disservice when we just throw out things that continually make us feel good, but rather deal with the ambivalence and the ambiguity and the difficulties of life and how we can get through them together through the message Jesus has given the church. Sometimes God is going to bring you wholeness through prayer. Sometimes God's going to bring you wholeness through a sermon. Sometimes God's going to bring you wholeness through a Bible study. And sometimes, as Allison Cook says, God is going to do all of that healing and wholeness through a therapist. And that's okay. That's okay. Let's engage with one another. Let's be supportive as we do the heavy lifting of self-discovery, of community discovery. Let's encourage one another as we do the hard work of loving and working to transform those enemies that live within ourselves. Let's love them too. I'm going to end with a story from some of my final days working at the hospital. We would have frequent team meetings with some of the folks we were serving, their doctors, some of their community supports. It was alarming how many of them had to endure their treatment alone. They had no one in their corner. They had no one to support them, to hear them out, and often that led to a lot of emotional and mental health trauma. But there was one time I remember I was working with a particular client. In every team meeting, she had 4 guests in her treatment planning conference. 4. And she would proudly introduce who they were every time. She would go around and say their names, and then she would always say, "These are folks that go to my church." And they would sit there and they would listen with her. They would support her. They would offer her encouraging words. They would excite her towards her recovery, and then they would continue to love her fully once she was out of the hospital. I find great hope in knowing that the people that Jesus has called to love are feeling that love through the support of the community that's normalizing that it's okay not to be okay. We've all been there. We'll carry you because people have carried us before. We've learned to wrestle with the same things that you're encountering now, and so we know that you can do that too. Jesus wept. Such comfort for the church to know that Jesus feels so deeply to the point of showing and feeling loneliness, but then also joy. Knowing that Jesus also felt anger, but Jesus also knows love. Jesus knew the feeling of acceptance as he knew the feeling of rejection. And Jesus knew how the disciples were feeling, especially after his crucifixion and in the resurrection, which is why he's constantly ministering to them. Peace. Feel peace. And so thank you for this Sermon on Demand. I'm excited to see what my colleagues pick. And I'm excited to see what we continue to normalize in the church. an active resistance to say, no, we stand with those that folks often feel alone. That we stand with those in need of healing, and that we stand with them. Why? Because we too know what it's like to grow in that way. Love your enemies as yourselves. Love them to the point of transformation, even when they reside within.
Staring at a stop sign, watching people drive by, T-Mac on the radio. Got so much on your mind, nothing's really going right, looking for a ray of hope. Whatever it is you may be going through, I know God's not gonna let it get the best of you. You're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under, 'cause God is holding you right now. You might be down for a moment, feeling like it's hopeless. That's when God reminds you, you're an overcomer. You're an overcomer. Everybody's been down, hit the bottom, hit the ground. Oh, you're not alone. Just take a breath, don't forget, hold on to God's promises, because you gotta know you're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under, 'cause God is holding you right now. You might be down for a moment, feeling like it's hopeless. That's when God reminds you that you're an overcomer. You're an overcomer. The same and the great I am, the one who overcame death, He's living inside of you. So just hold tight, fix your eyes on the one who holds your life. There's nothing God can't do, He's telling you. You're an overcomer. Stay in the fight till the final round. You're not going under, 'cause God is holding you right now. You might be down for a moment, feeling like it's hopeless. That's when she reminds you that you're an overcomer. You're an overcomer. So don't quit, don't give in, you're an overcomer. Don't quit, don't give in, you're an overcomer. Don't quit, don't give in, you're an overcomer. You're an overcomer.
It's good to be with you all today. I do have one quick announcement. Pastor Greg is going to be on next week for Sermons on Demand, and the request has been Pandemic Church. What will the church look like when we come back? Where will we see growth? What will really challenge us? And I like this request because not just locally, not just with the Lidditz congregation or the E-Town congregation, but really what will this be about globally? How's God moving through the church, the whole church, the worldwide church, in those moments? Folks, it's my blessing, it's my hope and my prayer for you that you learn the inner parts of yourselves and that you see some growth If you feel sadness, pay attention to it. It's a cue. If you feel happiness, pay attention to that. It's a cue. Then if you feel things like envy or anger, pay attention to those. It's all a cue. As God's imagers, we were given those emotions and those feelings, I think, for a very specific reason. Let's name them. Let's love them. Let's learn and let's grow from them. We'll be back after the postlude, which my man Josh has a wonderful, wonderful postlude for us today. We'll be back. Pastor Greg and I will be up here, and we'll field questions from the community for a talkback time. So go ahead and put your questions in the chat now. God bless you all. Be at peace, and may we normalize even the hard parts of our lives as we serve one another in love through even those moments. Amen.
All right. Wow. What a postlude.
I'll give you $20 if you go attempt it right now.
I taught Josh everything I know.
I bet you did. I bet you did. Yeah.
Didn't take very long.
Yeah.
That was
Josh,
awesome.
we
Josh.
love you,
Thank
man. That is great. That is great. And all to see the fancy footwork going on too. We appreciate that. Hey, so yeah, Sermons on Demand. We're officially in it.
Take it away.
You know,
You had some really good questions
Yeah,
there.
going through great questions. And again, like maybe this is something that could be explored as just a sermon series eventually, because there is so much that we can talk about. And so again, thank you, Rachel, for getting the questions started and for starting the conversation for some. I want to address Chris Spatz, a member of the Lidditz congregation. He had a question. I think I lost it, but the gist was, here we go. I have a question for Eric. How do we let our emotions go instead of holding them in and saving them for a rainy day? And that's a really popular question. And it's honestly one that I would get a lot when I was working in behavioral health. You know, it's not necessarily letting them go or just dropping them or even holding on to them tight, but maybe holding them a little differently, right? And so, you know, to that point, especially with the drawer and cramming everything in and then just saying we'll deal with it until later, right? I think it's really, really helpful to just address it as they come. You can't always, so sometimes you've got to tuck it behind, but I think especially for kids, it's really important to address how they're feeling in that moment, because what are we teaching them when we say, you know, you don't need to feel angry, you stop that, and we don't really address it. We sort of diminish the significance of what the child's feeling, and we put it off, we downplay it. So help them in that moment, like, okay, you're feeling sad. Suddenly they know that someone recognizes what's going on within them. And then at that point, we can help them then in a healthy way, in a productive way, express that inner dialogue they're having with themselves. And so it's always good to, you know, don't save things like that for a rainy day. That's usually when you get behavioral problems or emotional problems and breakdowns, is because you have put it off for so long. You have waited too long to the point where you're going to have to do some really serious unpacking, because you need to be able to do it well. And so I would say, Chris, it's a great question, because it's a reminder of, you know, address these things as they come along. Like really just kind of pause. Like, you know, if someone on a committee like says something and you're like, I said that a little while ago and I feel a certain way about it. Like, well, I don't like how that's going. Name that within yourself. Why are you feeling that way? Or if someone says something about the way you look or about the way you present, you know, any way you present yourself, or even the way you think about things, they may quickly try to diminish that within you, because they're also trying to diminish that feeling within themselves. And it's just like my good friend said to me, and it was such an important reminder this week, you know, the potential for hurt people to hurt people is very real. And so, you know, in the church, we say we are a healing people, right? That we are continually working towards healness and wholeness, and that's what we should then be offering in our ministry, in our life of discipleship. So it's a great question.
So
Go ahead.
one of the helpful tidbits that was shared in here was from our own Rhonda Myers, who's a professional counselor.
Yes, great.
And she used that acronym of RAIN, which I thought was really good.
I'd like to get coffee at some point with. Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be good to talk with her.
So scroll through the chat, and you can find some of Rhonda's helpful information there that she shared with everybody.
It's great.
You know, what do you, Eric? What do you think about this idea of holding things maybe more loosely at the same time? Like that's advice I think that I've heard a lot, that I've given to people sometimes, is that rather than kind of holding it so tight that it gets us wound up, that we hold something more loosely. What would you say about that?
So it's like the belief that anger is a sin. Some people hold on to that belief that when they feel anger, that they are actually doing a disservice to themselves and to God, right? And so even just allowing to loosen the grip a little on anger, let it roll around a little differently. Maybe, you know, move it within yourself a little to kind of feel, what am I learning, or what are the inner cues that I'm experiencing that this anger is trying to reveal about myself? And so, you know, don't always just take that, you know, to feel sad is to appear weak. You know, hold that a little looser and say, maybe to feel sad is is how God is healing me in this feeling. Or maybe it's God even saying, you know, maybe you should talk to someone about this, or maybe you should seek some help. You know, there's stigma, even you know, in mental health or emotional health, or even in relationship counseling. Like, I'm thinking relationship counseling, like, to sign up for that is some sort of like a signal of defeat.
Right.
Like, well, I couldn't do it on my own, and so now I'm going to have to pay somebody. And, you know, a lot of us get wrong what therapy is. I'm sure our sister would say, you know, it's not just you lay on a couch or you look at ink blots and you know, it really is just one-on-one a conversation. Now, I want to say this, another pitfall that we can experience in the church is that the church thinks that it is the expert on emotions, or it is that magic fix for some of these things, when really, you know, as pastors, we will often recommend someone go see them. Like, that's out of our realm of we really think you should see some, but the church can fall into that pattern of thinking it knows what's best, and so you see things like conversion therapy. Right? People are feeling a certain way, you know, or even some Christian counseling. It can mean well. Just make sure you find a good spiritual, you know, a spiritual director or a good Christian counselor, because again, you need someone that's really just going to listen.
That's
and
really
recognize
important.
you.
That not all counselors are created equal.
Not all of them are created equal.
That's for sure.
Right. And
you know, one of the things I tell people when I do premarital counseling is that, it's a requirement. It is a requirement. I will not marry you unless you do the premarital counseling. And one of the things that I tell couples is that this is not only for the sake of your relationship now, but this is practice for a time when you may need to come back. Not necessarily to me, but when you may need that relational help or tune-up, even thinking about it like that. When I was thinking about my call to worship this morning, I sort of casually dropped that I had talked to my counselor.
Right.
And I did that fairly recently.
Right.
During COVID times, because things felt overwhelming, and I felt like, you know what?
Wait.
Why shouldn't I?
Are you a person?
Hi. I would shake your hand.
Are you
if it
a
were
living,
different
feeling
time or give
human
you a
being
hug,
that
so-
also has emotion
Right,
and
yeah.
also cares about what
You
goes
know,
on inside you?
yeah.
Hey, that's a news flash,
Yeah.
right? Like, this is right. That's right.
And so it's a normal thing to do. It's an
Absolutely.
okay thing to do. It's a good thing to do.
Absolutely.
One of the things that the professional I was seeing said to me was, you know, when you have that trigger event that says, oh, you know, you feel something within yourself, it doesn't feel quite right. It could be a wide range of emotions.
Right.
He says, ask, what is this? What is going on? And then that opens up a whole new world if you just take that long beat
Yep.
and you say, what is this?
And that's something that Tara taught us at Bethany, was this sort of these three like great questions: the where is God in all of this? What is really going on here? And then the most, what is mine to do? You know,
Right.
that's our golden triangle of how to respond to any given situation. Like, first, what is going on within myself? Where is God in the midst of that situation? But then, what is mine to do moving forward?
You know, it's funny because that was always his second thing.
Yeah, right.
What is this and what is mine to do?
Because you have
Yep.
to do the heavy lifting, which is why, you know, I often encourage folks that, you know, church is a place where we go to wrestle with the ambivalence of life, you know, some of the harder aspects of life. You know, it is also a place where we go to feel encouraged and feel empowered to really kind of seize that day. But you know, if we need to do the work, like we need to do the work, which is why in my sermon, I reference, please don't let any sermon that we give be your 20-minute therapy session, because we're likely not going to be, you know, we're trying to give an entire group of people some tools and just different ways of seeing things. But the hope is that come have a conversation with us. Two of the questions in here that I really appreciated was one.
Can I give a quick caveat before you go there?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Because part of that question is what is mine.
Yes.
While we have to do heavy lifting sometimes.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't.
Sometimes we don't.
Sometimes it's
That's
the
right.
other person's stuff.
It's right.
And we're codependent, or
That's
we're
right.
trying to save them, or you know,
That's
and
right.
not that pastors would ever feel that way.
No.
about people. Right.
But we recognize that. And why? Because we have it too.
Right.
Right? Like, Jesus understood those things because he felt it too. And so, two quick things. One, Rachel had asked a question in there about, you know, how do you deal with other Christians who sort of, you know, I guess play down mental health, that sort of thing. Again, you're let's just pray it away kind of Christian. You know, any conversation you have, I really do believe there are some good things you can learn from it, and then some things that aren't going to serve you well, right? And so, you know, I always try to look for the things that I can learn and I can take out of every interaction. And then there are things, you know, you just kind of file away to talk about later. And so that is a great question, because you're going to encounter some folks that maybe won't agree with going to see a therapist. Again, I know just working in some of the hardest folks for us to treat before were men who had just grown up hearing suppress, to talk about this is not what we're called to do. And then now they're trying to deal with unlearning that. So.
Okay, Eric, here's one I want you to answer, because I can't, because
Yeah.
I don't fit the category, but I'm pretty sure you do.
Oh, thanks.
How can an extrovert best handle these times of COVID? I, you know, in all seriousness, I fall more toward the middle. But
Yeah.
you seem like a pretty extroverted person. What do you think about that?
I once had an introvert tell me that I am the most exhausting extrovert they've ever been around, which, you know, is an important thing for me to
the
remember.
first question you asked is, what is this?
Okay, what is really going on
What
here?
is really
Like,
going on?
I can understand that some folks need a nap after an hour with me. I could get it. So, I think that I've had to do a lot of mental health juggling through this, and I appreciate you sharing some of that as well. I am grateful for a support group, because I am someone that it doesn't take very long to know how I feel about something. I really wear my emotions on my sleeves, right? And I think a lot of us do that. The problem is that people can also use that not to really help us, but even to sort of have an advantage over us in those moments. And so part of that is learning, like, okay, well, what is mine to do? Well, then how much of this do I share? How much of this do I process? I'm someone that leans towards the size of find people you trust, that you know care about you, that really want to see you grow through this, and do some of that outward processing. Because again, like Chris was saying, if you tuck it away for a rainy day, that's when the problems start to come to light.
Yeah.
So it's a great question. So extroverts, I feel you, like I really do. It's been very hard. I think it's also been really hard on introverts. Sure. I think we are all feeling some sense of needing that connection, or knowing how to, just how to be human in these times, right? And so and I think right now, because this is so unprecedented, we're really needing to learn a lot as church leaders, and how do we best serve people right now where emotions are very high, right? Mm-hmm. Very, very high recently. What do we do to help people work through some of those things?
Well, another question that was earlier was asking for some scriptural references.
Bob
to,
Bonastock, I think, posted that.
I thought of a couple. What'd you think of?
Because I've got a few too. I mean, there's quite a few. Yeah.
The one that comes to mind for me, and I think it was because I studied it in seminary, and it was a revelation for me now, but seems pretty obvious in retrospect, was Jesus and the Gerasene demoniac. They called this guy, it was their understanding of the world at the time. If you had something that was going on mentally, then, and it exhibited itself or manifested itself in different sorts of ways, then they said, oh, we know that's a demon, obviously, that's inside the person that needs to get out. We understand the world differently now, obviously. But just to see the way that Jesus interacted with the man and the conversion, so to speak, I hate to use that word because you used it in a negative way earlier, but Jesus and the way that Jesus approached him, was not afraid of him, engaged him, brought him in.
Definitely a positive use of the word.
You see the value of community in that story. You see the value of acceptance in that story. It's so rich, and all because this guy was said to have had a demon.
Well, and again, the 10 points to Jesus for once again modeling by example, right? Like giving this person just the time and the energy and the effort to just really to take care of that moment, which is great, right? There's a few, Bob, and we can talk about this, but one that I typically turn to is right out of the gate, Jesus in the wilderness, being tempted. He's being tempted by human tendencies, by, turn this stone into bread. Well, of course, we want to feel like we're important and we're loved by people, and what better way to do that than to feed the hungry among him, right? And then the other one was, he's showing all the kingdoms of the world, and then there's that feeling, that temptation to feel powerful, to feel in control, right? Because I think that is a great place of vulnerability that we all experience when we feel like we're not in control. And then the third is sort of like this religious, like he all he's got to do is say the word and God will take care of it. So this sort of thing of like, you know, you have religious control too. You've got your faith, you have God under control, you have God at your disposal. And so those are tendencies, but then Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus is one of the most profound moments for me when we see Jesus in a state of deep emotion. But then really also too on the cross. I mean, the gambit of emotion that he experiences in that, even as he gives up his last breath. And then there's the classic scene of Jesus kind of, you know, righteous anger, prophetic theater of anger, flipping the tables over in the temple, driving out the money chargers. You know, so he is. I think he's a lot. I feel like I really relate to Jesus because he also wore his emotions on his sleeve. Like being in agony so much where you're like sweating blood drops, like that's really in touch with your inner emotion.
So maybe the last question of the day, because this is a new sort of way of thinking that you've introduced to me today, in some sense, that you have taught. You know, we in our pre-planning for worship, we talked about this as a sermon on demand for to talk about mental illness, to talk about mental health.
Right.
And you've really put the spin on it of emotions.
Yes.
So tell us why.
Very intentionally.
Tell us why
Very
that's the
intentionally.
angle you took.
So many of us hear mental illness or mental health, and we immediately self-diagnose and say, they're not talking about me, right? The reason I wanted to go the emotional angle is because emotions are mental health, right? Emotions can lead to deeper mental illness because sometimes our emotions lead to things like self-medication, which can have serious problems down the road. But when we talk about mental health and mental illness, we cannot just immediately write ourselves off as though we're exempt. But when we really tap into the fact, and this is something that Heather was processing with me as we were talking about the sermon, was she says, I find this helpful because we all experience these levels of emotion. You know, it's not just for folks that need medicine or need to be in the hospital. Like, I think we could all, and hear me say this, we could all benefit from a therapist. We could all benefit from a counselor. There's absolutely no shame or harm in talking about these things with someone trained to get you through them. And so, again, let's normalize the mental health, the mental illness side so that we are welcoming of all of God's people, which, by the way, just as a side fact, my final senior, my MDiv project at Bethany was on, it was a tool and a resource to help congregations be far more hospitable to folks that are living with severe mental illness.
Okay.
So
Nice.
it's about all of us. It's not just about a few, but we really need to sit down and name this in ourselves.
We don't have time to keep going.
This is
but
great,
there's
though.
some
Like
nuggets in here. Do you have any parting
Well, hopefully,
thoughts you want to share?
hopefully the chat will stay this time. We had trouble getting back to it, so it'd be good to see some of the comments.
Yeah.
I would say this. One of the reasons I like the idea of sermons on demand, especially now, is because we have just come out of a sermon series that really did trigger some emotion, right? Like, and we've processed those out with some people. It's been good, it's been hard, it's been really hard in some of those conversations. We understand that, right? And so sermons on demand now is a way to sort of, you know, we want to hear, like as a church, the things that are really, you know, what are the things you feel like you need to hear more about? And so I think a lot of folks are going to look forward to next week's sermon because a lot of us don't know how we feel about what the church will look like post-COVID, right? Or when a leadership team announces this is what worship will look like, people are going to feel a certain way about that. Or if a church decides not to open or to open too soon or open now or open later, people are going to feel a certain way about those decisions. And so I hope today kind of kicks us off as we talk about some of these other things. Pay attention to your inner dialogue when you amen a comment, when you feel like you've been blessed by a comment, or when you've been challenged, or you feel a little righteous anger about some of the conversation. And so
I can't wait for next week.
It's going to be great.
I'm really looking forward to it. And it's not just
it's going to be great.
What are things going to look like when we give the nod to come back to worship?
Right.
This is going to be how will this, or how do we think? You know, because
Yeah.
it's speculation. We're still in the middle of this, but how do
we
we
don't know.
think this will change, maybe even fundamentally, some of the ways that
Right.
not only do we gather, but the ways we think about church. And I'm particularly excited, and I feel really fortunate that we're now part of a community. You know, we've got this partnership with Lidditz, but we've got partnerships with other congregations that are watching.
Right.
We've got folks who are watching. I mean, this morning we were literally coast to coast. And so how do we think about church in that context? And what might it mean to say that we're not only, on Sunday mornings, we're not only E-Town and Lidditz, we're like this something else. And we're all gathering together. And
What
it's
is really
and it's
going
such
on
a-
here?
And it's such, yeah, it's such a
Where is
beautiful
God in all of
thing.
this? And then the important question for the church, what is ours to do in the midst of all of that? Yeah.
Will we, and my question for the church has always been, especially as Christendom has apexed and is now declining, what are we willing to do to be the church of tomorrow? Not just live the glory days and put those safely to bed from yesteryear. What are we willing to do to create a whole new way of doing church? Maybe. We'll see.
How you feeling about that, folks?
I'm
Let us
excited,
know. Let us know. Because, yeah, I think this is exciting conversation. I think a lot of folks are ready for this kind of conversation. And so let's do it. Let's have it.
Amen. All right.
See you, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. See you next week.